Hello, everyone. If you clicked on this video, you're probably curious about cross-origin resource sharing. In today's video, I will be going over kind of the fundamentals of this topic, and then I will be going into a programming example using JavaScript and the Node Package Manager, and the package I will be using is CORS. I will leave a timestamp below of when the programming starts if you already have a fundamental idea about the topic that we were discussing, and let's get right into it. Let's talk about the same origin policy. An origin just contains the URI, the host name, and the port number. That's the protocol, which is the HTTPS or HTTP, and then your domain name, which is also known as the host name, and then the port number. HTTP and HTTPS have different port numbers. However, we're using 3000 for this example. This policy applies to the browser, so any requests made within a script using the same origin is allowed. However, any script that is not within the same origin of the current browser's URL will be blocked. And these requests are known as cross-origin requests. The reason why these origins are blocked is so that it prevents these scripts to go to these origins and then being able to access sensitive data within your own DOM. Even with the same origin policy set in place, there are still ways to get around this by using a HTML tag. Meaning, if you were able to do a request through an HTML tag like an image, you would still be able to get that response back. So when it comes to the browser versus a node, we kind of know that the browser, like I said, it only allows the same origin request and it has the same origin policy, and that's the reason why that's the case. But node allows any origin requests because it doesn't have the same origin policy. It's just like any script. So you're able to make fetches to any origin and still accept those responses and utilize those responses. So now you're probably wondering, well, if this action is blocked within scripts, how do you allow us to make those fetches to those other origins within the browser? And that would be CORS. We know from the beginning, cross-origin means we're making a request from an origin that is not within the same context of the current origin. We're basically making it to where we can access resources outside of your own origin using specific data to attach to the header, which allows us to access the resources from another server as long as they've set up the CORS for your origin. This allows us to basically bypass the same origin policy in a secure manner so that you can allow specific origins to access your data and then not allow others. So how does this work? Let's kind of go step by step. So number one, the browser will make a request. So that's when you do a fetch request to that specific origin that you are wanting to. Number two, the browser attaches its own origin and then puts it onto the HTTP header and then sends it off to that origin. Number three, the fetched origin server will receive the request, and it'll respond with three different kind of possible scenarios, depending on the CORS setup. So in response one, the server that you are requesting for will send a single ACAO, and then response two will just be all of them. So it allows any type of origin to access its server. And then the third response would be an error. So basically meaning that either the same origin policy is in effect or there's something else going on with the fetch requests. So on number four, the browser will receive the response and it'll either continue the request because it was approved by the access control allow origin, and you will be able to access that response data, or you will get the error and you'll have to deal with that on your side as well. As you can see, the same origin policy blocks every origin besides your own whenever you want to make a request within the browser. However, CORS allows you to negate this by having specific origins that it allows to make requests from your browser to their server. Now, you might be curious of how we actually start using this. Well, let's get right into some JavaScript programming. All right, here we are. So you see kind of quite a bit on the screen already. I have some files set up so that it would be easier to show you the process, and I will kind of go over everything so that you kind of understand what things are and where things are. And then we'll start actually coding. Let's first begin with the browser. So as you can see on the top right here, you will see a localhost 3000. So currently I'm doing everything on localhost, and I'm just going to be using a different port. As we know that different ports will mean different origins. So it will work the exact same way if you were to change any of the other attributes of an origin. This is localhost, the domain name on the port 3000. And this is where our server is going to be making a request to the outside source, the cross-origin request to this bottom browser, which shows a JSON page that is attached to this domain name with the 2000 port. and it's attached to this specific route called /message. This is the API. This is basically what our localhost 2000 message is. If you don't know how APIs work, I'll just show you a quick overview of this file, which will kind of give you an example of what it's like. It's a very simple server, and it's just using the Express package. Like I said, it's on port 2000. So this is the route that exposes this JSON. As you can see, this is the hey I am hostname port. As you can see down here, that's what this shows. It shows the local host and the 2000 port from this. Now I use Splat and I'm just sending a 404. So that means if any other request comes in, it's just going to give you a 404 page. And then of course, this is the port that we're listening on. So once we start listening on to the port number 2000, we will just send a console.log that will print us that it has started listening. And that's just basically so that we know that everything has been set up and now we can access the server through this port number. All the dependencies needed for this API is just Express. So everything is pretty simple, straightforward. And like I said, what we're trying to access right now is this JSON file. As you can see, we can access it using the browser, which is perfectly normal. Let's go to the other server. That is what we're going to be making that request from. So like I said previously, you would be able to also make this request here. So if you're wanting to make the fetch request, you'd be able to make the fetch request and you would be able to get that data without having to have CORS. And that's just because, like I said, it doesn't have same origin policy attached to this. Okay, so let's look at this file. So it's very similar to the other one. We have the message as well on this one. We have /message. And will give us a message saying, hey, I'm localhost 3000, which is different from, hey, I'm localhost 2000. And then the root directory will give us a HTML file called CORS. And you can kind of see that here. We also have one more thing that you may have noticed is the express static. So whenever we need files within HTML files, we want to be able to get that route just within the same origin. And that would be within the public. This is why we need it, is because we need the XCORS CGS file. And the XCORS CGS file will be contained in the HTML file. This is like a basic HTML file, but we have the script contained in here. It's just a /xors.cgs file. And in fact, if we wanted to access that, you would just do xors cgs, and it would allow you to download this file. Ta-da! Downloaded. The other three tags that are pretty much the only important ones, some of them more important than the others ones, is the header that shows us the let's make a request, the p tag with a span tag within it, which this is where we're going to have the response be placed into. So within the span tag, we're going to do a document.getElementById, which will give us the element of the span tag using this ID response, and we're going to place the message within the span tag, or the error message within the span tag. And then button. As you can see within the button, I have already called a function that we're going to use when we go into the XCORS CGS file, which is just a JavaScript file. And when we click on this button, it will place the response within this span tag. And currently, the only package that we have for the dependencies is Express as well for this. Now, let's start working on downloading some dependencies. The first dependency that I'm going to download, just for simplicity's sake, whenever we save our files, we want the server to restart. So a good one to install for this is called nodemon. You can create a configuration file to change the specific extensions that you would like to make changes whenever you save. But with what we're doing, we don't really need to make a configuration file, as most of the files that we're changing are already set up by default. Let's also download the dependencies onto the API server. So the API server will also include the nodemon. And then we will also download CORS onto the API server. This is where we are going to be doing all of the CORS programming. First, let's make this request. I think making the request and seeing that it will propagate an error to show you that the same origin policy is in effect currently. So let's do this. Because of this function, I'm just going to name it the same thing. We're going to do make request 2000. And call it make request 2000. There are two ways to do this when we make a fetch request. So a fetch is a promise, and so fetches have two syntactical ways to do this. However, we're just going to use the async function one so that we can make this look a little bit neat. So the way this works is promises are put into higher priority. So when a fetch makes a request, it takes time. And so we don't know when that response is going to come back. However, whenever it does come back, we do want it to have the highest priority. And so that's why we make it a promise, so that once this request comes back as a response, we can take care of that exactly at that moment without having to think about any of the other functionality working on the browser. So let's create this fetch. So now that we've created that request, and now we can receive it in this variable as the response. Before we continue, we do need to add a try catch. If you're not familiar with a try catch, it just catches errors that were propagated from within the try. Now, why this is needed is because normally whenever you would do it syntactically with a dot then or and then a dot catch, that would take care of it. However, to take care of errors that happen when a fetch is sent, we need to do a try catch so that we can catch that error. If successful, will contain a Boolean that will say whether or not that request was a status good request or a status bad request. Currently, the way that we have this API server set up is that it will send us a 200 status code saying, hey, this is good. Any status code with 200 to 299 is good. Anything with 100 to 199 or 300 to 599 is bad. What we want to do next is we know that when we make this request, we're expecting some data. So we want to access that data somehow, right? Well, the response will contain that within a JSON promise. And because this is a promise, we also still have to wait for this as well. So now that we have this data, we can access the message by doing data.message. But we're missing something, right? Well, we need to go get the element itself that we're looking for, this element. We want to get this span so that we can place that message within this span tag. So let's do that. All we got to do is make a response L, and then we can do document.getElementById, by ID, and then put in that ID that's within here into the getElementById. by ID. This will give us the element so that we can place the data within it. So now we just got to go into the inner HTML of this element and then place the data within it, like so. The reason why we're doing .message is because within the JSON, we know that message will be the key and the value pair is the hey, I am localhost 2000. Now, with the same inner HTML, if we have an error, we want to propagate that and make sure that we say, hey, when there is an error, place it into this inner HTML too. So we can do it here as well. As the error here will give us the error message. We can, in fact, get this explicit message here like so. This message has nothing to do with this data message. This is specifically for an error message and doesn't have anything to do with our messaging that we get from here. If I had changed this to, say, message with MSG, it would then need us to do the MSG to get that attribute. So these have nothing to do with each other. Requests. So I'm starting both of the servers. Oops, I probably should have used nodemon. I have to use the command executable because my PS1 PowerShell executable isn't working. So I had to do it this way. So then you would do npx nodemon and then the server that you're wanting. So normally with this on, I should have had this on to show you a little bit previously. So I have localhost 3000 and my port is 3000. As you can see down here, it's listening on this port. If I were to change this now to 2000 and save it, you can see it's listening onto port 2000. In fact, let's make this 1000 because I don't know how many errors that could possibly happen if I have two of them listening on the same port. So now let's make it 1000. So if I try to refresh, I'm going to have some problems because it's not listening on that port anymore. However, I go to 1000, it is listening on that port. Awesome. That's basically what nodemon does, is it allows us to kind of just update things on the fly. And let's do the same thing with this one, the API server. Awesome. Now they're both up. So if I refresh both of these, this one on 3000 like it should be, and this one is working. Awesome. So they both are on. So currently what we should expect is an error because we can't do cross-origin requests without that origin specifically allowing it. So let's try it. Let's look at that. It failed to fetch. And that's because it could not receive that message. Now, let's try to see what happens if we used 3000, our own origin. And we made the same request. Hey, I'm localhost 3000. And that's because our server also exposes the same type of API that the 2000 port does. And it'll tell us, hey, the local host, the domain name, and then the port number. And as you can see, it's the same as the browser URL's origin. So of course, because it's the same origin, you can make that request and get that response back successfully. Now, how do we then get the request from 2000 without getting a failed to fetch? We have to allow the origin localhost 3000 on the API server. And how do we do this? Well, we need to get the CORS package, which we have already installed here. All we have to do to get that package and use it is to do CORS, require, and CORS. Look at that. We have it right here. There are different ways we could do this. What we could do is we could say app1.use. Then we can do CORS. We can call the package as its function and then place in a body the origin that we want, like so. Now with the API server, when we use .use, we're saying that any resource within our server can be accessed by this origin, meaning it could access message. And if I created another one called message1 and I exposed this one, it would allow us to access this one as well. But if we were wanting to allow it only to specifically get one route, we would just specify that here. Done. And that would only allow us from the local host 3000 to make a request in the browser to this specific message. I will show you that this works later. However, let's just try to get the message itself. So, in fact, since we've already set this up here and it has loaded because of a nodemon, we should just be able to refresh this and make that request. Look at that. Hey, I am localhost 2000. Because we have set it up here to allow this message, it is allowing us to receive that response and then place it here and then expose that JSON by unpacking it, putting it in data, and then sending it into the inner HTML. Done. That was perfect. Now, let's try to see what happens when we add that route and only allow this specific message. Of course, we can still get that message. Hey, I am localhost 2000. But now, if we go back into our browser's JavaScript file and we try to get the message 1, save that, refresh, and we make that request, it'll fail to fetch it. And that's because in our API server, we have only allowed it to access this last message route. I would like to still continue to mention is that we are not using cookies. However, if we were to use cookies, credentials true would allow this origin to access those cookies. As you can see, CORS is a powerful tool as it allows us to make requests that are not within our own origin because of the restrictions from the browser. This is especially helpful when it comes to having a front end and a back end, and you're really needing to make requests and you have them both being servers and you need to be able to use, let's say, for instance, the cookies of one server, but you cannot because those are blocked because you're using your origin and not the origin that has those cookies. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, drop a comment down below, and thanks for watching.